Was that around the time when you coined the phrase sexually transmitted debt with Jenny Launton?
The sexually transmitted debt story sort of started I'm not exactly sure of the timing, but what happened was this. So for at least the first year of running cases at the Consumer Credit Legal Service, I didn't lose one. And I hadn't actually lost a lot of cases that I was instructing in personal injuries for the insurance firm either. So when we lost a particular case, I was completely devastated. We'd lost this case, and I knew that there were problems in that particular case. There were 5 of them. And the tribunal member liked to read his judgments out in person. So there was a great deal of drama over them, being handed down. And I listened as we won each of the 5 points that I was worried about in that particular case. And then at the end of the case, he said, but I find that Ms. X accepted liability as a joint borrower on this case. And I'm thinking, well, how can you do that? If she wasn't the principal borrower, the law that we were applying at the time said you're a guarantor and you need to be treated as a guarantor, and if you don't do the documents for a guarantee, you've got an unjust contract and you can get the person taken off the credit contract. How can you, just because they'd been in a sexual relationship together, assume that she didn't have a separate legal interest from her former partner? But my reaction was to come back and storm up and down in the office, and I can remember myself pacing up and down going, well, that's it. I might as well give up on this job now. And I can remember Dennis laughing at me. And he said, you ready to calm down and have a chat about it? And he said, you didn't see that coming, but I think you might be onto something. And what you need to do is you need to actually get some people together and start a conversation to find out what is going on, not just in the law, but in public perception. And, my reaction as a litigator had been, well, I'm going to get another case and I'm going to go back there and I'm going to win the other case. And his reaction as a politically astute lawyer was, no, if you're in the same climate, the same thing's going to happen to you again. And he said, you need to find out what's going on. So we started the Women in Credit Task Force. And we sort of talked for about a year. I also had in my head at this time a comment that I'd made when I'd been invited to go and talk about women in credit. And I can remember talking to them saying, I don't know, it's really a gendered issue. Credit's a problem for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're male or female. And once I said that out loud, I started to check that. And we did a lot of telephone advice calls at the legal service, which meant we had this ready source of consumer experience. And I'm thinking, I think that's a gendered issue. I think that's a gendered issue. I've really missed this because I was so, overwhelmed with the enormity of the whole credit problem in itself. And we ended up with a little bit of funding for some pamphlets on women in credit. And one of the people on our task force was one of the legal officers for the Consumer Affairs Department. And she ran it by their publications and they said, we've been looking for a publication like this. Can you ask them whether we can do this? And they were we had $2,000. They were going to spend $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 and put the whole campaign out there. So at the end of our year's work, we handed it over to the government department and got this wonderful coverage, but we still had our $2,000 grant. And we thought, well, what do we need to do with that? When people come for advice on these issues, we're going to have some advice for workers. So we turned around and Anna Taylor, who was a wonderful financial counsellor at the time, was available to pull the whole little publication together, and we did the first little book, which got called How to Get Out of Sexually Transmitted Debt. Now, why did it get called How to Get Out of Sexually Transmitted Debt? It was because we've been a bit cheeky throwing around the meeting, and we thought, we've got to get the attention of the caseworkers And they, people get overwhelmed, and we wanted to get it out there in the different neighbourhood centres. And we thought, well, that'll get their attention. But of course, who loved it? The journalists.
Of course.
Of course. So it was all over, we'd get magazine articles, we'd get all sorts of different things with sexually transmitted debt. Then we were delighted to get a request from Belinda Fellberg as to whether or not she minded if we used her title in a doctoral thesis. And she ended up writing the book called Sexually Transmitted Debt, based on her research of English and Australian cases. So,
isn't that a wonderful story?
It was fantastic.
And how it just always comes about, like, just by chance. You're in the right place at the right time. You talk to somebody who says, let's take a political angle rather than a casework angle, and off you went. And then having the funding fall into your lap, all those sorts of things.
But it was also giving it a name was interesting, because instead of people saying, I don't know what to do about this situation I find myself in, they would ring up and say, I've got a sexually transmitted debt problem, and the subtext is, and I know you want to solve it for me. And I was thinking, wow. And so after that first stage, before the next stage is when I did my trip to Iceland. All right. So I had 4 months off, and I came back, and I was then introduced to the staff of the new Banking Ombudsman's office, and sitting around their first office boardroom in Carlton. And I thought, so what sort of cases are you getting? And they sort of started talking amongst themselves, and they're saying, oh, well, we've got this and we've got that, and we've got these STD cases. And my mouth must have just dropped open. And they sort of said, oh, no, sexually transmitted debt. And I said, I know what it means. I just can't believe you're talking about it. Oh, yeah, we've got a whole lot of people that are, contacting us, and we've got this and we're doing this with it. And it was wonderful to see, just wonderful to see.